Hello.
Dr. Reich?
Speaking.
This is Judge Nelson. Good afternoon. If you'll please raise your right hand, we're going to have this. Well, before we do this, do we recognize the voice to be that of Dr. Reich?
I do, Your Honor.
Both sides?
Yes.
Okay, please raise your right hand to be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will testify truthfully in these proceedings, so help you God? Thank you.
Okay, you may proceed, Mr. Mantine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Preliminarily, Dr. Reich, have you tendered a CV or a resume in connection with this case?
I tendered two of them, a forensic acoustics one and a more general, more detailed academic one.
Your Honor, this time I would move, and I believe they've been provided both to counsel and to the court previously.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, the Reich CV will come into evidence as State's Exhibit number 2.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Reich, could you please go ahead and tell us a little bit about your academic background, your fields of study, and how long it is that you pursued that for a living?
How long I pursued what for a living?
Let me start with, Doctor, do you have any...
Education. Right. My undergraduate degree is in speech and... So garbled. Oh.
Go ahead, Dr. Reich.
It was all garbled.
Okay. What I'd like to start with is your academic and educational background and history.
Right. I understand it. Okay, my undergraduate degree is in speech and theater from the University of Connecticut. My master's degree is in speech pathology from the University of Connecticut. And my PhD is in speech science from the University of Iowa. And the consulting work I've been doing since 1975.
Okay. You have held which sorts of positions in your academic work?
Have I held?
Yes, sir.
I was a teaching and research assistant in Connecticut for 2 years when I was a master's student. And I was a teaching and research assistant at Iowa for 4 years while I was a PhD student. Then I was an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut for 2 years, from 75 to 77. Then I was a professor, at the University of Washington for 25 years, from 1977, well, 23 years, 1977 to 2000.
Is that when you retired?
Yes. From academia.
Okay.
Not from life, not from work.
Yes, sir. Dr. Reich, have you done something other than simply be a professor?
Have I done work other than being a professor?
Yes, sir.
You mean before I was a professor or since I've been a professor?
Well, you mentioned consulting work. Tell me what it is you did.
Okay. I analyze acoustic signals for investigative agencies and for the courts. I do tape authentication, tape enhancement, tape transcription, gunshot analysis, the sounds of gunshots, speed identification, so a few other things like that.
Okay. Have you been, are you a member of any part of professional organizations or similar organizations in connection with your fields of study and specialty?
Yeah.
Are those accurately reflected on the resume that you tendered?
They are.
Okay. Dr. Reich, have you consulted for law enforcement, for private corporations, as well as federal organizations over the course of your consulting career?
Yes.
Does that also include private lawyers and private investigators?
Unfortunately, no, I'm only kidding. Everyone, I've worked for both sides pretty equally, actually.
And have you ever been tendered as an expert to testify in your field of expertise in court before?
Yeah.
How many times?
I'm not sure. I think about 25.
Okay. And are those also reflected on your resume?
Yes.
That both state and federal court?
Yes.
You've also authored publications and given presentations over the course of your career?
Yes.
Those are also documented on that resume?
On the longer resume, yes.
Okay. Dr. Wright, tell us how you came to first be involved in the case that we're here about today, State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Which organization was the first one to contact you?
None.
Okay. How did you get involved?
That may be a surprising answer to my interest in it was from the internet and from the kind of controversy that was going on. I knew nothing about the case. Out west, they don't pay much attention to things that are going on in the east. It was getting a lot of publicity in the east, but very little in the west, out in Seattle where I was. I was late in hearing about it, and I heard about it when they released tapes, when the police department, Stanford Police Department released redacted tapes.
Were you contacted by the Washington Post?
Pardon?
Were you contacted by a newspaper?
I can't understand what you're saying.
Were you contacted by a newspaper, Dr. Wright?
Not initially. I was interested and started analyzing the tapes even before I was contacted by Washington Post because I was concerned about the kinds of statements that were being made about the tapes.
Okay.
And then during that period of time, within a month when the tapes were released, I was contacted by Washington Post, and I was recommended by the head of IntelNet.
Is that who you did your initial work in this case for?
That's to provide some seed money to assist me in what I was already involved with.
Okay. Did you prepare, well, let me ask you this. When you go to analyze a tape like this or recordings like these, tell me what sorts of processes you use and why.
Well, this is an unusual one in that we had some very low-level questions that needed to be answered first. That is, first of all, what's the speech analyzed? What's the tape analyzed? Was it of sufficient quality to be analyzed for any kind of acoustical studies? Not speech necessarily, but for acoustical studies in general. Was it adequate for some acoustical studies? The second thing we were interested in was whether or not all the speech that had been transcribed on the internet was actually representative of the speech that was on the tape. And it was very clear that with different groups saying that different words were different, that there was some transcription problems with the tape, and that there were there were both background sounds and foreground sounds, and only the foreground sounds were being reasonably accurately transcribed. So I was concerned in finding out if we could enhance the tape to bring out background sounds, of which there were hundreds.
All right, Dr. Wright, what I really want to focus on for purpose of today's hearing, you're aware that this is a hearing as to the methodologies that you employ.
I am aware of that,
okay.
but it's
Let me
important
start.
for the court. Can I answer my question? Your question, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, Your Honor, may I answer that question?
Yes, go ahead and answer.
Okay. The reason I'm talking about the signal quality and picking up background signals is that many of the signals that were used for speaker identification were amplified out of the background noise.
So
it's an important distinction. They were not foreground signals for the most part. They were background, background signal.
So tell me what processes you used and how you went about it.
Well, the practices we use were kind of practices that are used in analyzing speech in general, which has been done for centuries. That is looking at the sounds of speech and inferring what kinds of movements of the articulators and the throat and so on, the throat, the mouth, the lips, what kinds of movements went into making those particular sounds.
Dr. Wright, are you familiar with oral analysis, and that's oral, A-U-R-A-L, of a recording such as these?
Yes, oral analysis refers to A-U-R-A-L, refers to expert listening, and that's, in terms of my work, that's a very important part of my work in addition to the acoustical work.
Okay. You mentioned the next thing, acoustical analysis. Tell me a little bit about what that involves.
Well, historically, in studying speech in general, well, not even speech, studying sounds in general, whale sounds, bird sounds, speech sounds, we've taken the sounds that these individuals or organisms make, and we break them down into their component frequencies. That is, the sounds that we produce and these other animals produce are sounds that have a lot of overtones or partial frequencies in them.
Just one second.
We break those
Is it an objection?
composite sound, that overall sound down into the individual frequencies that make it up.
Okay.
That process, in various forms, is called spectral
Very hard on
analysis.
Dr. Wright,
speakerphone.
just hold on for a
Spectral
minute.
analysis began,
They can't
believe it
hear
or
us
not,
on
in the
speakerphone.
1830s, with a mechanical version of what we call a spectrograph.
Okay,
It's rolled around on the floor.
Dr. Reich,
But
Dr. Reich, we're having a hard time understanding, so if you could speak a little louder and a little slower and
Okay.
give your responses as to the questions that are asked. Mr. Manti, go ahead and ask your next question. Mr. West, if you need to move up here, you're free to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Wright, I want to focus, you mentioned acoustic and spectrograph, and those are the sort of the two words after the oral analysis that you mentioned. So give your answer in a little slower fashion as it relates to what is it about acoustic analysis and spectrographic things that you did in this case that assisted your work.
I did a variety of different kinds of spectral analyses that have been done for a long time. Spectrographic analysis, long-term average spectra, short-term average spectra, and then a variety of non-spectral measures as well, including pitch patterning and loudness patterning and emphasis kind of patterning.
And Dr. Wright, I'm assuming that you have some kind of computer or software that you use to assist you in doing that.
Well, we do now. Historically, I've been around long enough I wasn't around for the mechanical version, but I was around for earlier analog versions of this equipment. But now it's almost all entirely done on a microcomputer.
Okay. So do you use that computer software also to assist in your analysis of tapes like these?
Entirely, yes.
Okay.
In addition to the oral AUR-AL analysis, the listening analysis, yes.
All right. So all three of those measures then were components of your research in this case? Is that what you're telling us?
Three meaning AUR-AL, spectrography, and what's the third?
Well, simply the fact that you actually use computer software in addition to help you with that. Is that right?
Well, the computer software generates the spectral analysis.
Okay. Anything
But
about
we were generating the spectral patterns, as I said a long time ago, during World War II, using a totally different technique, but functionally the same technique, but about burning charcoal on paper.
Okay. Dr. Reich, anything on, new, novel, completely unheard of before that you employed in arriving at your conclusions in this case?
No, the equipment and the software used is all available to anyone who wants to pay for it.
So Dr. Reich, I want to focus in particular on what we're here about today, the 911 call, and the identification of the person or persons, if they can be made of this generator of screens on that tape. Are you familiar with that?
We're talking about the call number 3 on my report?
Yes, sir.
Yes, what's the question now?
Okay. Tell me what you, let me rephrase that. Did you employ the methods that you just described in an attempt to identify who was the person emitting those screaming sounds?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a sample, when you did that, of the known voice or represented to be the known voice of George Zimmerman?
Yes, a number of them.
Okay. Did you have a sample when you did that also of a known voice or a voice attributed to be the known voice of Trayvon Martin?
At a later time I did. Not initially I did. There was nothing available, and I insisted that we couldn't proceed without some kind of samples of his speech.
Okay. Did you eventually receive one?
Yes.
And did you use those known samples to compare them to the version on the tape that you said that you listened to containing screams?
Yes.
And when you compare the known samples to the screaming sound, what is it that you actually do?
We first of all, we analyze longer speech, listen to longer segments of speech to begin with, but ultimately we try to set up pair comparisons. So we look at relatively short segments of speech, that is sometimes a syllable or one syllable word, two syllable words, maybe 3 or 4 syllables top, and compare the known and unknown right next to each other, and look at the acoustical characteristics, not just the spatial characteristics, but the acoustical characteristics in general, and listen to them at the same time. So we're listening, and we're not listening to the original tape, listening to copies or tokens that have been extracted from the tape for easier listening, by a jury or by us.
Dr. Reich, did you, first off, were you able to determine whether or not you could identify George Zimmerman as what we'll call the person who was making those particular screaming noises once you filtered them out?
Well, I identified a certain number of speech utterances that were not Mr. Zimmerman, but that isn't necessarily all of the loud speech that was on there.
I understand.
That is, I'm not ruling out Mr. Zimmerman as producing loud speech, just as the person who was producing the very high-pitched, very loud screams. That's how we define screaming. Phonation or voice reduction that's at a very high loudness level and a very high pitch level. It has to be both. And those utterances, those were not yours.
Okay, so you mentioned a high pitch and a phonation.
High pitch and the loudness. Pitch and loudness both have to be extremely high.
In order
for screaming. As opposed to shouting, for example, which might be at a high loudness level, but not necessarily at a high pitch level.
And doctor, are there factors, other environmental factors such as the distance from the microphone that's picking it up, human factors such as the stress that the person might be under? Are there mechanical factors such as the size of the channel or the compression affiliated with the phone and the microphone themselves? There are a lot of things that could affect your ability to analyze sounds like these.
Yes, sir.
Okay. As far as you said that you identified make this conclusion was that you weren't having to compare these voices or these screams to an infinite number, but you had only two voices that you had to worry about as being possibilities in this case?
Yes, and in fact, the decision we're making first is George or not George, or Trayvon or not Trayvon. Very simple elimination decision before we even get to the identification part.
And did you base your conclusions on the, first of all, I guess, how many hours did you spend listening to these recordings?
100.
On the listening that you did, as well as you referenced the acoustic and spectral analysis. Tell me what it is that you look for there.
Well, we look at a number of characteristics depending on what's available in the signal, of course, because the signals that we deal with are often very, very distorted. These are not entirely the most distorted signals I've ever dealt with. Many of the aircraft black box recordings of words, for example. But we look at hundreds of different characteristics, both in the spectral realm, that is looking at the noise, the acoustical characteristics of S noise, for example, the acoustical characteristics of T burst, which is in the word stop, for example. The position of the resonant frequencies in the vowels and semi-vowels. Those are very important characteristics. For example, the resonant frequencies mean the frequencies that are transmitted best have particular vocal tract shape or movement. And so, for example, the first resonant frequency, which appears as a bar, on that first resonant frequency is related primarily to tongue height. When you're talking, as your tongue moves up and down, it affects that frequency the most. The second one is related to the fronting or advancement of the tongue. The third one is related to lip rounding and retroflexion of the tongue tip. That's retroflexion means curling back your tongue tip for R-like sound. So those are just some of them. We have hundreds of characteristics that we look at.
And so you use the auditory comparison by your ears, the sort of visible comparison that the spectrograph allows you to start to make at all those points. And you have the computer assist you in doing that to arrive at your conclusions?
Yeah, so in addition, I use other acoustical tests that are well established that, for example, long-term average spectra, because I was thinking that maybe some other people had done that previously. I wanted to compare that. I didn't report that in my report.
Yes, sir. Look it up this moment.
Yes, you may. Just one moment, Mr. Reich.
Okay.
And Dr. Wright, did you use all those things in connection with, I think you said that one of the helpful things was just an assumption based on the known facts that there were only two candidates for the screening?
Yes.
All those things together?
Pardon?
All of those things together?
I can't understand what you're saying.
Was it all of those things together?
Well, I put all those things together. Is that what you said?
Did you consider them all together in coming up
Yes,
with
consider the oral characteristics, the listening characteristics, to verify the acoustical characteristics, and vice versa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wright. Another question, Dr.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
You're welcome.
Mr. West is going to ask you questions now. Mr. West, you may have to come up here so he can hear you. It's I don't know if the wires will reach. Bobby, can we see if that? Removing the phone so it might jostle.
And if we could get an extension, then council could stay at the podium or even at council table. And have access to co-counsel and Mr. Zimmerman.
I know, I can't get it to go any further. Thank you. Can we just move it aside?
Dr. Reich, can you hear me?
Okay, well, I'm sorry, say it again?
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Closer.
Mr. West?
Yes, I'm going to try and get a little closer to the microphone.
I hear you fine.
Oh, good. I'm not quite clear what you said your conclusions were, other than that they were tentative. Are you saying that you have not reached a final conclusion at this point?
No, I'm saying that given the number of data points that are available, that it's not possible to reach a definitive conclusion, just a suggested one.
So you in fact have not reached an opinion, rather you just have a tentative impression? Is that what you're saying?
No, I have an opinion, but it can't be a hard and fast opinion because the circumstances are not ideal circumstances.
So it's an opinion, but you don't hold it very firmly.
No, I wouldn't say that. I hold it firmly, but the circumstances, the guidelines for what people expect the samples to be for definitive analysis that were not met.
Well, why don't we talk about that then for a moment? What are the accepted guidelines and standards for speaker identification analysis?
Well, that depends on who's doing the analysis. If it's being done by technical people with undergraduate, with a high school degree, then the standards are different. And I would say that the standards that are used by the identification group, the Association of Identification, that those are appropriate standards for someone at that level. But for someone more with a more sophisticated view, I'm sure those are the best standards. For example, some of the standards that are used by the group are 10 seconds of speech minimum. We have research, repeated research, show that you can use a sample less than 1 second and be able to identify speakers. So it depends on who's doing the identifying. But
Well, let me
also the number of words. That particular group says 10 words is the minimum number, and the FBI says 20. It's neither of those is really hard and fast. But it's the quality of it.
How many do you use?
Well, there were fairly enough, over wasn't sufficient number of words. The problem was the quality of the signal.
So let's start here with the speech that you found that was a suitable quality for speaker identification. Did you identify all of that speech and did you isolate it?
Yes.
And how long was all of that speech combined in time?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would say that, hold on, okay. Well, I would say that it was at least 4 or 5 seconds at least.
So with your approach,
This is the speech that made up the pair comparison, not all the speech that I listened to. This is much more than that.
Yes, and I was going to interpose an objection to see if we could be clear that we're talking about the speech with the voice, the speaker comparison.
Okay, can you clarify your question?
I think he did.
Okay.
well, it's not clear to me. Let's talk about the audible speech. In that, let's talk about the sounds that can be heard by playing the recording through normal equipment.
Well, yes, go on.
Okay. Did you identify within that various words or utterances that you think are suitable for speaker identification?
Could you repeat that question? It's not entirely clear to me.
Do I understand correctly, Dr. Wright, that you found speech that just about anybody can hear by listening to the recording, and that you also found speech that you can't hear by listening to the recording without special equipment and amplification and such?
Well, that's close but no cigar, so I take that. I'm just kind of pulling up the signal on the computer right now. This is the final word, and it's kind of an example of the final word embedded in the 911 caller and the 911 operator contact. And you can hear the word stop in there, but it's down 30 decibels. You can hear it, but it takes a tremendous amount of listening to do that. Whereas when I gained it up or amplified that segment, the background segment by 20 decibels, then anybody's able to hear that easily. Whether it's running in real time or whether it's in just a 3 or 4 syllable context.
Well, maybe we'll approach it this way. Do you have a transcript of all of the speech on the 911 call that you believe can be identified by speaker?
Judge, I've interposed already a written objection if we're talking about all the speech on the entirety of the call.
Well, I understand your objection, but I also understand the question is, so Mr. West can then further ask how many words. So overrule your objection.
Would you answer the question, Dr. Wright?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure, because the question is a little bit vague to me.
What I'm trying to get at is, have you identified all of the speech on this recording that you believe can be compared and identified with a speaker?
Yes.
And do you have a transcript of that?
There is no final transcript of that. It's ongoing, and there are pieces of it that involve the speaker identification portion, but there are other pieces that were not analyzed or are not transcribed.
Yeah.
Some pieces of it that are not transcribable yet, or maybe ever.
Dr. Reich, I'm going to need you to sort of start at the beginning of that answer and repeat it for the court reporter, please.
Okay, where you want to start?
I'll read you what I have. There's no final transcript of that. It's ongoing, and there are pieces of it that
There are pieces of it that are analyzable, and pieces that are transcribable, and pieces that are not either analyzable or transcribable.
When
In other
you,
words, not 100% of that tape is not going to be transcribable by anybody with any equipment at all. So very difficult.
have you identified the speaker on all of the speech that you have been able to transcribe?
Yes.
And do you have that written down somewhere?
Yes, I don't have that with me right now.
Is that a document that exists that you could?
There's no file in the picture.
So are you saying your work isn't done yet, and there may be additional speaker comparisons or additional speech recognition that may come later?
The speed recognition is a different ballgame. That's usually referring to the automated recognition of speech by computer. I'm not doing any of that. It is possible that there might be some comparison that will be done, but right now I don't think there's going to be any further analysis of that type. Because the things that are being uncovered would be of lesser quality rather than of better quality.
Maybe we'll just start back at the beginning, and you can tell us specifically how you processed what had been identified as screams on the recording to identify those segments on which you performed a speaker identification. Are you able to do that?
As I mentioned before, the signals were virtually all in the background. So the signals first had to be amplified with the computer. But all that involves is identifying where the very soft signal is, and then multiplying it by some number to make it reasonably close in level and loudness, what you perceive as loudness level to the surrounding speech. And that's mostly what was done to all these tapes. There's very little fancy kinds of answer that was done. There's mostly just differentially amplifying signals that were not identified as speech before. It's when they were background effects and noises. They were not. They were speech.
I think where I'm confused and is that we seem to be talking about two levels of speech on this recording. That one is what's obvious to anyone who listens to the recording as being a yell or cry of some sort. Do you follow me on that?
No, I thought you were going somewhere I could agree with you, but you diverted it last minute. If you mentioned this foreground speech, then certainly there is foreground speech at a much higher level as associated with the 911 caller and the 911 dispatcher. And then the other signals are all that came from the men at the scene of the incident. That speech is much lower level at the microphone, microphone or telephone. Now, if you're talking about other differences in level within what was going on between George and Trayvon, there are some differences in level, but not really significant ones. In other words, all of the productions that were in the background, being produced by these two men, were all without some kind of amplification, were very difficult to decipher in real time.
So you're calling those the background speech?
Well, for want of a better term, yes.
And that's the speech that no one can hear without some amplification.
No, some of them can hear. And most of them you hear, but it takes a lot of effort and maybe experience.
Are you able to identify at this time where on the recording, that speech exists.
The difficult speech?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
And do you have a transcript of that available that you could send to us?
There's no complete transcript available yet. There are samples of comparisons between, and I think you've seen some of them, comparisons between pre-process and process, between the two men and the stop word, for example.
When you say the stop, you're referring to a
Word.
cry for some sort or a word near the end of the recording that others have reported as being the word help. Is that
Can
right?
I play it for you?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Is that the word that we're talking about?
Sorry, but in what context? That's the final word on the tape. And it's a word that was analyzed for both speaker identification and for phonetic transcription. It's PHONETIC.
So maybe perhaps, and I'm sorry that I'm a bit confused with all of this, but let's go back to this. Let's just start over, okay? Let's talk about the standards that are used. You said that some people require a 10-second minimum. Others may require more. And are you saying that you require less than 1 second of speech?
I'm saying that the research has shown that under certain circumstances, that only less than 1 second of speech is required to identify someone.
Is that
For
based?
example,
What is that research? What is that research, and does it relate to identifying people by screens?
no.
So that research,
Very little of the research is identifying people by screen.
well,
The non-forensic research, there is a small amount, large study, but small amount of data that came out of Nixon, but after the Tosi study.
that goes back to the days where the spectrograph was used extensively. Is that correct?
Extensively or exclusively?
Extensively.
Yes, still is.
And that's back in the era where it would, spectrograph was considered to be a voice print.
Sorry, ask him to repeat.
In the Kirsta, K-E-R-S-T-A era, it was considered to be a voice print.
Dr. Reich, would you please go ahead and repeat that from the beginning, not in the Tosi era?
Yes. P-O-S-I, so his last name is spelled. And not as that's a much later era that takes into account actual field use of a technique. Whereas Kirsta was the early introducer of this equipment to the police department and the investigative agencies. He's what began the ruckus.
Can we take a recess for a few minutes?
Yeah, he's not going to be able to hear me on there. Dr. Wright, can you hear me? Do you mind telling him we're going to take a 10-minute recess and we'll call him back?
Dr. Reich, we are going to have a recess for about 10 minutes, and we will call you back. Is that okay?
That is okay.
All right, thank you, sir.
Trish?